Don't forget to like the video, share your thoughts or story in the comments and subscribe to our latest stories. Before I start, tell me where you are watching me from. I wonder which cities and towns will join me in this memory that will follow me for years. When I think back to that evening, I can still feel the way my stomach twisted, half in anticipation, half in uncertainty. My husband had been acting oddly for a few days. He's not the type to keep secrets, not even small ones. Usually, if he buys me flowers, he can't resist showing them before I even walk through the door. If he plans something for my birthday, he slips up weeks before, leaving a trail of hints that I can easily piece together. But this time, he was quiet. Too quiet. It started on a Tuesday. He came home from work earlier than usual, humming to himself as he placed his jacket carefully over the chair. Normally, he tosses it like a teenager who can't be bothered, so the neatness instantly caught my attention. Then he asked, "How was your day?" in this overly casual tone, as if he wanted me distracted, not suspicious. I answered him, watching his eyes flicker, watching the way he tapped his fingers against the counter. Something was brewing. At first, I told myself not to make a big deal of it. After all, we've been married long enough for me to know that surprises don't always go according to plan. But that night, as I lay in bed listening to him breathe steadily beside me, I felt a ripple of unease. Not fear, no, never fear with him, but the sense that he wanted something from me, something I might not be ready to give. The following day, he came home carrying a large paper bag, carefully tucked under his arm. He tried to whisk it past me, but I caught the corner of a box peeking out. When I asked, he shook his head, grinning like a boy. "You'll see soon enough," he said. I laughed it off, but inside, my nerves tightened. Surprises have never been my strong suit. I like preparation, I like control, I like to know what's coming so I can brace myself. But his smile, it was genuine, warm, and filled with something deeper than mischief. It wasn't just about a present. It was about him trying to bring something new into our lives, some spark he thought we might have lost. That realization both touched me and frightened me. Because what if I failed him in that moment? What if I couldn't match his excitement? The day of the surprise arrived without warning. It was Thursday evening, and I came home tired from running errands. The house was unusually quiet, but I noticed a faint glow spilling from the dining room. My husband was standing there, in a shirt I hadn't seen him wear in years, the sleeves neatly rolled, his hair brushed back like he used to when we first dated. On the table, candles flickered, and I caught the scent of roasted herbs in the air. He had cooked dinner. That might not sound extraordinary, but for us, it was. He's never been one to spend much time in the kitchen. He leaves that to me, usually with plenty of gratitude but little interference. Yet here he was, carefully arranging plates, his hands almost trembling as he looked up at me. "I wanted to surprise you," he said, softly. My heart swelled, but so did the lump in my throat. I wasn't ready, not for the emotions, not for the vulnerability that came with someone trying so hard to love me in a new way. I felt caught between gratitude and hesitation. I wanted to throw my arms around him, to say thank you, to let the evening unfold, but a part of me froze. It had been so long since he had tried something so deliberate, so thoughtful, and I realized how much I had missed it. We sat down together, and he poured me a glass of wine. His hands were clumsy, almost nervous, as if he feared I might reject the effort. And maybe that's what shook me the most, that this man I've known for decades could still feel unsure of me, unsure of us. I wanted to tell him I saw his heart in everything he did, but the words stuck in my chest. The meal itself was simple: roast chicken with potatoes and carrots, a salad he had clearly chopped unevenly, bread warmed just a little too long in the oven. But it was beautiful. Not because of the flavors, though they were comforting, but because of what they meant. Each bite was proof of his intention, of the hours he must have spent watching recipes, planning this moment, hoping I would see the care he poured into it. At one point, as we ate, he leaned back in his chair and looked at me with a softness that caught me off guard. "I didn't want this to be just dinner," he said. "I wanted it to remind us of something we used to have, before life got so busy, before routines swallowed us." And there it was. The truth beneath the surprise. He wasn't just cooking for me, he was reaching for me, for the us that sometimes gets buried beneath bills, work, and long days. His words unlocked something inside me, a mix of guilt and longing. Guilt that I hadn't noticed how far we had drifted into routine, longing to hold on tighter before we drifted further. I smiled, though my eyes burned with tears I didn't expect. You didn't have to do all this, I whispered, my voice unsteady. I did, he replied. Because I don't want us to forget how much this matters. The silence that followed wasn't awkward. It was heavy, full of unspoken feelings, of years we had built together, of the quiet fear that time can take more than we're willing to give. I reached across the table and took his hand, feeling the warmth of his skin, the steady pulse beneath it. I wasn't ready for this surprise. I wasn't ready to face how much we both needed it. But maybe that was the point. Maybe being unprepared was what allowed me to feel the depth of it, to recognize that sometimes love isn't about comfort, it's about being shaken awake, reminded that even after all these years, there is more to discover in each other. That night, as the candles burned low and the dishes sat forgotten on the table, I let myself lean into his effort, his intention, his quiet plea for connection. And though I hadn't been ready, I realized it was exactly what I needed. After that first night, something lingered between us. It wasn't uncomfortable, but it was noticeable, like the faint echo of a song that refuses to leave your head. I carried it with me the next morning while I brewed my coffee and spread jam on toast. My husband came into the kitchen whistling, the same boyish grin tugging at his lips, as though he knew he had managed to rattle the careful order of my days. We didn't speak much about the dinner itself. He asked if I slept well. I told him I had, though in truth my sleep had been restless. Not in a bad way, it was restless because my mind kept replaying his words. I don't want us to forget how much this matters. They repeated over and over like a reminder, nudging me awake in the middle of the night. I've always thought of myself as steady, practical. My husband has been the dreamer, the one to imagine what could be instead of what is. But lately, I had been so focused on what was in front of me, the bills, the routines, the chores, that I didn't notice how much of his dreaming had gone quiet. Until that dinner. Until he showed me that even after all these years, he was still capable of surprising me. That weekend, he told me we were going for a drive. I hesitated. My calendar was full of things I thought were important: groceries, laundry, catching up on household tasks. But he looked at me with a kind of certainty I hadn't seen in a while. The laundry can wait, he said. I want us to have a day where nothing else matters. We got into the car, and he didn't tell me where we were going. The road stretched out in front of us, lined with trees that were just starting to hint at autumn. The leaves curled at their edges, streaked with red and gold. It was the kind of scenery that begged you to slow down, but he drove with quiet confidence, one hand resting on the steering wheel, the other tapping lightly to the music on the radio. After nearly an hour, we pulled up to a small lake I hadn't visited in years. We used to come here when we were younger, before the kids, before the mortgage, before life became a list of responsibilities. I felt a pang of nostalgia, sharp and sweet, as the breeze carried the scent of water and pine. I remembered how much you loved this place, he said as we stepped out of the car. I smiled, though my chest tightened. I had forgotten how much I did love it. The quiet rippling of the water, the way the sunlight danced across its surface, the sound of ducks gliding effortlessly. It felt almost sacred, like a memory preserved just for us, waiting for the right moment to return. We walked along the shoreline, not speaking much, just listening to the crunch of gravel beneath our shoes and the soft lap of waves. Every so often, he would glance at me with that same uncertain hope I'd seen at dinner. It was as if he was waiting for me to show him something: gratitude, joy, maybe even forgiveness for letting the years dull our connection. At one point, he stopped and turned toward me. I know I startled you the other night, he said quietly. I could see it in your eyes, you weren't ready. And I don't blame you. But I want you to know, I'm not trying to change everything overnight. I don't want us to fade into the background of each other's lives. His words pierced me in a way I hadn't expected. He was right, I hadn't been ready. But I also hadn't realized how much I longed for him to say exactly that. We stood there, the lake stretching endlessly behind him, and for a moment it felt as if time had folded back on itself. It was just us again, like when we were young, before the years layered on their weight. We found a bench overlooking the water and sat side by side. He reached for my hand, and I let him, feeling the familiar strength of his fingers wrapping around mine. The silence wasn't heavy, it was grounding, as if the world had hushed to give us space. I leaned my head against his shoulder, surprising even myself. I'm not always quick to show affection in public, but in that moment, I wanted him to know I saw him, that I felt the effort he was making. His breath hitched slightly, and I realized how much it meant to him too. We stayed like that for a long while, until the sun dipped lower, painting the sky in strokes of orange and purple. When we finally stood to leave, I felt lighter, as though I had set down something I hadn't realized I was carrying. On the drive home, he reached for my hand again across the console. I didn't pull away. Instead, I held on tightly, letting the silence between us say everything words couldn't. That night, as I lay in bed, I understood something I hadn't before. The surprise wasn't just the dinner, or the lake, or even his words. The real surprise was that after all these years, he was still trying. And maybe, in my own quiet way, I was ready to start trying too. The days after our trip to the lake felt different, though nothing had visibly changed. The laundry still piled up, the groceries still needed buying, the phone still rang with bills and reminders. Yet, in the quiet corners of our lives, I noticed something shifting. Maybe it was in the way he lingered longer at the breakfast table instead of rushing out the door, or in the way I found myself softening when he forgot to put his shoes away. It wasn't about perfection, it was about presence. I think the moment I realized just how much had shifted came one afternoon the following week. I was in the kitchen, peeling apples to make a pie. It's something I've always loved to do in the fall, a small ritual that makes the house smell warm and alive. He walked in, rolled up his sleeves, and without asking, started coring the apples at a tea first. I wanted to protest, this was my task, my space. But then I stopped myself. Maybe this was what he meant when he said he didn't want us to fade into the background of each other's lives. Maybe letting him in, even in small ways, was part of the surprise I hadn't been ready for before. So we worked side by side, slicing apples, tossing them with cinnamon and sugar. Our elbows bumped, and we laughed at how uneven his cuts were. The pie wasn't perfect, but when we pulled it from the oven and sat down to share the first slice, it felt like the most perfect thing in the world. Later that evening, we sat on the porch together. The air had cooled, carrying that crispness that comes before the full arrival of autumn. He wrapped a blanket around both of us, and for the first time in a long while, I didn't feel the urge to fill the silence. We just watched the leaves drift from the trees, one after another, as if time itself was slowing down to give us this gift. You know, he said quietly, his voice almost blending with the rustle of leaves, I've been thinking a lot about how we used to dream. About the things we wanted to do together. Trips we never took, projects we never started. I don't want to let those slip away. His words stirred something in me. It had been years since I thought about those dreams. Life had gotten so busy that we stopped looking forward, focusing only on the immediate. Yet, as he spoke, memories surfaced, late-night conversations when we were younger, talking about driving across the country, planting a garden, maybe even writing a book together. Little things, big things, but all filled with possibility. I felt a pang of regret. Not for the life we had built, it was full, it was good, but for the parts of us we had put aside, thinking we'd come back to them someday. I realized that someday doesn't always arrive on its own. Sometimes, you have to choose it. I looked at him, at the lines time had etched into his face, lines that told stories of laughter, stress, joy, and loss. He wasn't the young man I married, but in that moment, I saw the same spark in his eyes that had drawn me to him all those years ago. What if we picked one of those dreams? I asked. Just one, and made it happen. His eyes lit up, and I knew instantly he had been waiting for me to say that. Which one? He asked eagerly. I thought for a moment, then smiled. The garden. We always said we'd plant one. The way his face softened told me everything. It wasn't about the garden itself, it was about the fact that we still had something to build together, something to nurture side by side. From that day on, the garden became our quiet project. We planned it on scraps of paper, debated over vegetables versus flowers, and laughed at our lack of experience. It wasn't about creating something grand, it was about reclaiming the space between us, about finding joy in planning, in working toward something beyond the routine. One afternoon, as we knelt in the dirt planting the first seeds, he looked over at me with soil smudged across his forehead and said, I don't know why we waited so long. I didn't answer right away, but inside, I knew. We had waited because life demanded it. But maybe, just maybe, life had brought us here at the right moment, when we were ready to see each other again, not just as husband and wife, but as companions in the truest sense. That evening, we stood on the porch again, watching the sun dip below the horizon, and I felt a quiet peace settle over me. I wasn't ready for the surprise he had given me weeks earlier, but now, I realized, I was ready for what came after. The garden grew slowly, but with every sprout, I felt something inside me growing too. It wasn't just the plants that needed tending, it was us. Every time we stepped outside together, watering cans in hand, kneeling side by side in the soil, I realized how much I had taken for granted. The sound of his voice telling me a story, the way his hands worked carefully even when clumsy, the patience he showed when I got frustrated over crooked rows or weeds sneaking in by the middle of the season, the garden wasn't only about vegetables. It had become a place where we found ourselves again. We'd sit in the evenings, dirt still under our fingernails, watching the light fade while our little patch of green hummed with life. I saw him differently there, not just as my husband, but as someone who still carried dreams, someone who still wanted to share them with me. One evening, as the tomatoes hung heavy on their vines and the sun dipped into a wash of pink and gold, he set his tools down and looked at me. "You know," he said, "this all started because I wanted to surprise you. I didn't know how you'd take it. I was afraid you'd think it was silly, or worse, that you wouldn't care." I sat back on my heels, his words settling over me. I wasn't ready that night, I admitted, my voice low. "You caught me off guard. I've always liked knowing what's coming, being prepared. But maybe that was the best thing you could have done. Because it made me realize I had stopped expecting surprises. I had stopped believing there was more waiting for us." His eyes softened, and I could see the weight lift from his shoulders. "So you're glad?" I smiled, a little laugh escaping me. "Glad doesn't even cover it. I think I needed it more than I realized." For a long time, we sat there in silence, listening to the rustle of leaves, the soft chorus of crickets, the distant hum of life carrying on. It wasn't dramatic, it wasn't grand, it was ordinary. But inside that ordinary moment, I felt something extraordinary: gratitude. Gratitude for the years we had built together, for the trials and routines, but also for the courage he had shown to shake us free from them. Gratitude that even after all this time, we weren't finished, not with each other, not with the life we were building later. As we walked back into the house, I realized the real surprise wasn't the dinner or the lake or even the garden. The real surprise was that after so many years of believing I knew every part of him, he showed me there was still more to discover. And maybe, just maybe, there was more to discover in myself too. That night, as we turned off the lights and settled into bed, I reached for his hand first. He looked at me with quiet wonder, as though even that small gesture meant the world. I whispered, "I wasn't ready then. But I'm ready now." And in the stillness of that moment, I knew this memory, the dinner, the drive, the garden, all of it would follow me for years. Not because it was perfect, but because it reminded me of the most important truth: love doesn't end when the routine begins. It only ends if we stop surprising each other, stop reaching, stop trying. I wasn't ready for his surprise. But in the end, it became the greatest gift he could have given me.